Starfield is a very frustrating experience, Bethesda's first IP in decades, and it really fell flat on its face. For myself, I did enjoy certain aspects of the experience, but as time has gone on, the technical constraints and the design choices have become glaring problems for this game, and whether or not, Bethesda should make a Starfield 2, I really right now feel like they should not. I think that there is not a big three, there is just Elder Scrolls and Fallout, and I think that's what people want Bethesda to focus on, and even then, I think there's massive concerns with the quality that the Elder Scrolls 6 or Fallout 5 will get, because this current day Bethesda seems to be, they've lost their mojo. I mean, Day one, Starfield, it earned a very mixed reception for many gamers. You can look to reviews on Steam right now. It has about a 59% based out of 100,000 reviews. That is not great. And over the last couple of months, we did see Bethesda respond to some of these criticisms, and the responses just equally weren't very good. We saw Emil Pagliarulo, he is one of the design directors, one of the lead writers at Bethesda. He responded to this criticism in December of 2023. He said, "Don't fool yourself into thinking you know why it is the way it is," which was just a truly insane thing to say. He went off on players. He had a very long thread we talked about in a separate video, but some of the highlights was that funny how disconnected some players are from the realities of game development, and yet they speak with complete authority. I mean, I can guess what it takes to make a Hostess Twinkie, but I don't work in the factory, so what the hell do I really know? Not a lot. But silly comparison aside, and I said this at the time and I'll say it again, but a lot of us know how a Hostess Twinkie should taste like. When we bite in, we know if it's good or bad, or if something's off. And the same could be said about games in general, or entertainment in general. When we play a game like Starfield, we have an expectation based on the marketing, based on other experiences, and for a lot of people, Starfield just didn't click, and for some reason, Bethesda has had trouble grappling with this reality. But Emil did continue. He said, "Parts of me really gets it. When you're a consumer and spend money on things, that gives you the right to complain about those things. I spend a lot of money on the games every year, and sometimes it takes a lot of me not to scream into the internet's collective consciousness. I don't complain about games on social media for two reasons. I know how hard it is to make games, and he also works at a game studio." But he continued saying that, "I'm not trying to change anyone's mind because of the internet, but given my position, I can't not share the truth, and that truth is, nobody sets out to make a bad game. Most game devs are incredibly talented, even if the game they release isn't up to par. See, I never knew this before, but if nothing else, video game development is a series of concessions and tough decisions. There's that perfect game you want to make, and then there's the game you can make. Sometimes if the gods smile on you, those two are very close. So sure, you can dislike parts of a game, you can hate on a game entirely, but don't fool yourself into thinking you know why it is the way it is, or how it got to be that way, good or bad. Chances are, unless you've made a game yourself, you don't know who made certain decisions, who did specific work, how many people were actually available to do that work, any time challenges faced, or how often you had to overcome technology itself. This one is huge." And again, these remarks were made in December of 2023. This was in response to criticisms that people were throwing at Starfield, and this was absolutely insane to me because this has nothing to do with how people enjoy or feel about a game. And yes, people are going to be pointing at individuals for blame for why a game isn't successful, and that goes with movies and any entertainment. This isn't a new concept, and that's why these remarks it was head-scratching at the time. And Emil did respond to some user responses at the time. He said, "I mean, they can blame me for everything, I don't care. That comes with my position. What really bugs me is calling a piece of my work crap when it's not crap, although I don't know why he's the judge of that. And it's not even mine. That just does such a disservice to the people I've watched work so hard for so long." And these baffling remarks were followed up by Todd Howard in May of 2023, in which he discussed why he thought Starfield was so divisive. And it was too different than you've seen from us in the past, which that's not at all the criticism, Todd. But he said at the time, "We see a lot of players saying this is what I want out of a Bethesda game, which is to explore a world in a certain way, and Starfield didn't give me that. I prefer the way it's done in Fallout or Elder Scrolls." And he says that's perfectly understandable. He says it's just not the experience Starfield sets out to provide. And while these remarks, I had many issues with it, Todd Howard later on in the summer had an interview with Mr. Matty Plays in which he talked about criticism, and I thought it was a much better response, in which he said that they were harsh critics themselves and that he encouraged stuff like this.
These franchises and the time that people spend in the games, they're really, really important to them. You wish people would be nicer, but it does matter a lot to them. At the end of the day, the fans and the consumers, they should, if it's not living up to what they want out of it, we expect that criticism. We need to hear it, and we need to get better, and we're really, really welcoming of it. We're actually like our harshest critics here in terms of all of that.
So after this interview, Bethesda, Todd Howard and company have been concentrating on Shattered Space, the first major expansion for Starfield. They have some grand ambitions for this game. They want it to go on for years. There's already been some leaks in regards to another expansion coming next year. But with Shattered Space, it was an opportunity to win back players, and I think Bethesda was saying all of the right things. Todd Howard called it a traditional Bethesda experience, other Bethesda developers as well, and he even compared it to Fallout 4's Far Harbor, which was a well-received expansion around 2015-2016, and this was supposed to be an opportunity to have one handcrafted location with that traditional exploration, but ultimately Shattered Space was terrible, and it really makes me concerned about the Elder Scrolls 6 Fallout 5 because it makes me feel like Bethesda has lost their mojo. And the problems with Shattered Space is everywhere. The technical constraints continue to be a problem. The design choices, it's all over this expansion. The writing is laughable, the characters are boring, the dialogue is boring, the choices give you that illusion of choice, and then the exploration even of itself just feels like the base game in which you have empty, boring planet going to locations that you just don't care about. So Shattered Space fell flat on its face for myself. I have my own review which goes over extensively all of my problems with it, and it's many, especially because there was expectations having a character like Andrasia who has ties to the Varun Kai homeworld, and for some reason Bethesda just decided not to explore any of that. There's just so many mistakes here, and ultimately critics and users alike feel the same way I do, because right now Starfield Shattered Space on OpenCritic has a 59 top critic average and only 31% of critics recommending this experience. That is not far off from the critic review scores of Fallout 76. That is god-awful. And even on Starfield's Steam page for Shattered Space, it's just as bad. A mostly negative rating based on 2,400 reviews. Only 30% of them are positive, and even some of the positive ones are making fun of Bethesda. The story is boring as fuck. Would recommend if you have insomnia and need to work the next day. This is as bad as it gets for Bethesda game studios, and a lot of us have been wondering how they would respond to the criticism that they received with this expansion, and unfortunately it just doesn't feel like they're at all listening to the criticism they've received the last number of months since Starfield even launched. And we saw, again, Emil Pagliarulo discussing these reviews and discussing the negative reception that Shattered Space has received. And this is what he said in a long Twitter thread. He said, "Twitter has never been a place for political discourse, but I'd like to address what I can." And he goes on to say, "Optimism and excitement are pretty standard for interviews, and I'm generally pretty optimistic and excitable about games by nature. That said, my optimism is in no way meant to be mud in the eye of any dissatisfied fan. That's not how it works." And then he followed that up saying, "I'm also very proud of Shattered Space, we all are," which is a continuation of his remarks that he made in that interview in the lead up to Shattered Space. If you don't know what I'm referring to, I have a lengthy video about it, but some of the highlights from that specific interview was that he said that they were confident in that Starfield is following the right trajectory. I don't think so, but this is how Emil feels. He says, "I think in a lot of ways Starfield is the hardest thing Bethesda has ever done. We pushed ourselves to make something totally different, to just jam into an Xbox, the biggest, richest space simulation RPG anyone could imagine, that we pulled it off, make Starfield something of a technical marvel. It's also, in a lot of ways, the best game we've ever made." And then he continued forward saying that it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but what is? We created a new IP from the ground up and an experience that is absolutely unique on consoles, and I'm not saying Starfield is better or worse than any other game, just different in what we offer. And then he said that it's now Elder Scrolls, Fallout, and Starfield, Bethesda Game Studios' big three. He says, "Always keep your hits in mind. For Shattered Space, Far Harbor was the real touchstone in terms of landmass size, questlines, quality. That was a really solid DLC, so I'd say we started there. But then, as happens when you have something special, the project takes on its own life, it becomes its own thing, it exists in its own pocket of awesome outside of comparison to something else, and when that happens, that's when you dive in fully committed to the vision, and your gut is just telling you it's going to be good because it was made with so much passion." Yes, Emil said, because Shattered Space was made with so much passion, it equals quality content, which is blasphemous in my opinion. But getting back to these fresh new remarks that Emil posted on a lengthy Twitter thread, he continues this passion point of view, in which he says, "Most of the quests and levels were done by designers who have worked on previous Bethesda games and DLCs, going all the way back to Morrowind," which which is great, Emil, but the problem is we're not living in the past. We're moving forward. We're looking to the future. It's awesome. Morrowind was great when it released, but the problem is Bethesda's design seems to have been, it's stuck in the past. We're living in the present. Competition has upped the bar, and Bethesda, for some reason, can't meet it. And then he says they're good at what they do, and it shows. But the problem is Shattered Space didn't show any of that. And it follows one of the big criticisms that has followed them for a while now, and there's tons of them, but side quest quality has been a problem for Bethesda. A lot of it is fetch quest content in which you go there, shoot a couple of things, or you grab something and then come back. That is Bethesda's quest design for the most part. That was a big thing with Fallout 4, one of the criticisms with that game. Fallout 76 is pretty much just that, and then Starfield had a lot of that within its base game, just along with the technical constraints of loading screens and playing menu simulator within the game. He continued saying, if folks haven't played Shattered Space and they like Starfield, I think they're missing out. If folks have played Shattered Space and still don't like it, that makes me sad, honestly. Just know that we've also been hearing from plenty of people who love it, which I don't like this last remark because I feel like it's almost trying to say that it's 50-50 when it's not. Most people did not enjoy Shattered Space. A lot of people that are very big fans of the base game of Starfield even admit that this was lackluster content and it felt like a massive side quest, and it very much feels like it was cut content from the base game that they ran out of time on. Emil then says, maybe it's a game of expectations. Fans want a lot, and we do all we can to accommodate them. Here's what I can tell you, nobody, and I mean nobody at Bethesda, is patting themselves on the back while ignoring our players. Although these new remarks and the interview that we just talked about a second ago definitely feels like he is patting himself on the back. I guess what just confuses me is when you look at the actual Steam numbers for Starfield, I don't know how you're satisfied with this. Shattered Space peaked at 21,000 players. It had 330,000 players at launch, and many of these individuals paid extra money to play this game early, and many of these individuals just didn't even choose to play this expansion. I think that really says a lot. But also the current player number peaked at 11,000 players. Skyrim does almost double that, far more than that I think, and then Fallout 4 as well. And even after Phantom Liberty, Cyberpunk 2077 saw a massive boost. It was like over 250,000 players. And the big thing is CDPR listened to the criticism. They listened to a lot of the outrage that hit Cyberpunk 2077, and they spent a couple of years revamping the game in many different ways. Bethesda just doesn't seem like they want to do that because they think everybody absolutely loves this game, and it feels like they're in an echo chamber at this point. And Emil's responses are pretty much feeling like corporate nonsense in which he's trying to appease both sides, saying that, oh no, a lot of people really enjoy the game, but oh, the criticism we're getting, we're actually still listening, but we're not seeing any of that. None of the fundamental problems with Starfield have been addressed. They've added a couple of cool things, some nice quality of life improvements, but the game hasn't drastically changed, and opinions have only gotten worse with time. Now, Emil did continue forward. He had a couple more responses in this Twitter thread. He said, in addition to Shattered Space, we've also spent a lot of time this year addressing community concerns and making fixes. Again, none of them fundamental issues or the core problems of the game. We'll continue to do so, and we'll be listening to our fans every step of the way. We make these games for all of you. Starfield is a massive game, and it takes time for us to address things. We move as fast as we can, as safely as we can. And one of the criticisms that Bethesda faced early on with Starfield was its lack of updates, especially compared to Baldur's Gate 3, which was getting constant, massive updates right after launch, and Bethesda went a good 6, 7, 8 months before they released anything of substance. Game development is always tricky, but with a game as big as Starfield, every fix could potentially break something else, and we've seen that. It seems like every update does break something. To close, let me just say I love games. I love Bethesda's games. I've been playing them since the Terminator days. All I or anyone here wants to do is make those games and then make them better. No ego, no arrogance, just a lot of hard work and appreciation of our fans. Well, the problem is Emil, he does have a massive ego with some of these responses that he's given the last couple of months in regards to the criticism that he himself has received. He did have another response I was going to go over, but he deleted the tweet. It was pretty much, he tried saying that a lot of the blame that people are throwing at him, it's on other individuals' fault, but I see why he deleted it. He didn't want to throw other people under the bus, but that's Emil for you. He's going to give you the corporate response, and he's trying to appease both sides, and it's really not doing anything to help anything. I mean, I'm glad that we are getting these developer responses, but at the same time, I'd really like to see Todd Howard come forward and actually address these concerns, specific concerns, because they just generalize all the issues people have with Starfield, and they like to neglect the actual core issues people have with the actual gameplay of Starfield. Starfield. They don't want to talk about that. They want to say that, oh, people didn't really want this type of game from us. But that's just not the case. The people that actually did play Starfield and reviewed it based on its actual content did not enjoy it for the most part. In Shattered Space, it was just a whole different story, which a majority of players did not enjoy this. But for some reason, Bethesda and Emil are like, actually, there was a decent amount of players that really did enjoy it, and we're satisfied ourselves, and I think that's just the wrong messaging. And beyond that, putting all this into perspective, Emil and it seems like most of the Bethesda team views Starfield as their best game ever. And with that mindset, it makes you wonder how much criticism are they even willing to listen to at this point? Like, it's one thing to be stuck in your ways, it's another to be oblivious to reality. And I think Bethesda might just be oblivious, especially since all the interviews, every conversation that we've seen so far post-launch, they have not talked about anything in regards to being unhappy about any aspects of the game. I mean, the only thing we have seen is Todd and Emil going on the defensive and even going after critics for their criticism of Starfield. We did see some response on the Starfield subreddit I thought was interesting. Somebody saying, Emil, just fuck, what a conundrum for me. I don't ever want to wish someone should get fired, and I have heard he's a really nice and cool dude, but this guy seems to feel up more upwards than Todd Chavez at Todd Howard. Another person saying, nothing new under the sun, and a fully expected response. He has never, not once, ever acknowledged specific criticisms from anyone. And when someone speaks broadly and generalizes the quality of the writing sucks, then he says, I don't agree, and carries on. Beyond that, it's typical corporate response laden with his usual egotistic approach to responding to criticism and never addressing anything. You're writing a space game, yet more missions could have taken place on the same planet. It wouldn't have made any difference. Emil, Skyrim for 2011, a 13-year-old retro game, has more players than Starfield. Explain this. And yeah, there's posts talking about, again, Andreja, one of the big criticisms with this expansion. There's also the fact that other people are talking about the lore. It really is baffling how bad it is and how uninteresting this universe. It's a space exploration. I don't know how you bomb this so badly. There's so much potential here. Bethesda just never did anything with any of this. One of the central pillars of Starfield is predicated on the question of what's out there. The fundamental problem, however, is that its lore currently answers with a resounding not a lot, actually, and that's very much the case. And then another individual saying Starfield is a mid-game that I've enjoyed for 100+ hours. And I think one of the big problems with Starfield's game design, and this is really going to be a problem with Bethesda moving forward, it's just that they think bigger is better, and that's not always the case. And Todd Howard basically confirmed this perspective about a week ago in an interview in which he said that their games are irresponsibly large. We cut very little from our games, which at this point, I don't think that's actually a positive. I think that's more a reflection that they're trying to make these games bigger and aren't necessarily looking out for the quality content or the quality experience, which really says a lot about the issues that they have behind the scenes. And again, at the call shotters like Emil, like Todd Howard, which right now are not taking much accountability for the issues with these experiences that have been going on for years. Like, you remember that report about Concord's game development and how it was plagued by toxic positivity? I almost feel like that's the same thing that's been going on at Bethesda, and like Todd Howard just has a bunch of yes men around him. Last year, we even saw a former Bethesda design director talking about some of the conversations that they had in regards to Starfield's scope in early development. How many planets? And this was an admission that, again, it reflects what Todd's saying now. He says that people love our big games, they love that open area to explore, so let's go ahead and let them have it. And then it was down to, how do we make exploration meaningful? But the problem is, exploration is a disaster in many regards because it's just empty planet, and the quality content is too far apart. And then Bruce Nesmith continued these alarming comments in another interview in which he talked about Baldur's Gate 3 and how they can't do that at Bethesda Game Studios. He specifically said, at Bethesda, the games we were making were so big we had to take the approach of, everybody's got to be able to do this at some point. We can't block off content that way, and you can see it in our games, we don't, and that's terrible for an RPG. I don't know why you would want to block off the possibility of having multiple paths and multiple routes. People love to try games in different ways, especially RPGs. I don't know why Bethesda has this mantra. But he continued, he said, in regards to Baldur's Gate 3, you get the impression, rightly so, that this decision I'm about to make will close off parts of the game and open up others, and it's meaningful, that means something, but for some reason Bethesda doesn't want to do that. And then we saw another former Bethesda lead developer talking about why he quit, and this was another recent interview just the other day in which Nate Perile worked at Bethesda for 14 years on games like 76, Fallout 3, 4, and Skyrim, and he left Bethesda in 2021 to form his own solo studio. He said that while he enjoyed his time at Bethesda, he left during development of Starfield because the team size had become far too large in his opinion. I know a lot of people have thoughts on Starfield and how it probably is too big, should have been smaller, etc. I agree with a lot of that. And while I enjoyed working at Bethesda a lot when we were about 65 to 110 people on Fallout 3 and Skyrim, I enjoyed it a lot less as it grew and grew. So this current day, modern day Bethesda is frustrating in many regards, and I do not blame Emil for all of the issues plaguing Bethesda. I don't think he's like a boogeyman. He's not the one person that is hurting this company. It's a collective problem, and it's rather interesting when you see these public interviews from Emil and Todd in which they say one thing, and then you see these former Bethesda developers that are like, yeah, those issues that players have, we've been talking about, we know it as well. I think that really says a lot about the honesty and transparency that I don't think we're necessarily getting from BGS, and the reason why is because they don't want to admit that they are falling behind. That puts them in a corner, and it also means that they have to commit to drastic change that I just don't think they want to do, which ultimately could lead to massive problems and massive disappointment with The Elder Scrolls 6, which could be facing controversy, maybe even worse than Cyberpunk 2077 if it doesn't deliver. Bethesda has to know that. It's one thing to shit the bed with a brand new IP and its expansion, it's another to do that with the most highly anticipated game other than Grand Theft Auto 6. So yeah, this defense of Shattered Space from Emil doesn't really move the needle at all in any direction for me, because I think it's more of the same nonsense that we've been hearing from Bethesda game studios for the last couple of years in regards to criticism, which is pretty much them just not taking any ownership of any of it. Unfortunate, maybe, but just not surprising. Anyway, what do you make of these remarks and Bethesda game studios in 2024 along with Shattered Space? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video or if you found any informative value. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.